Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beaten-up Honda Civic and stared at the imposing brick building before her. Lincoln High School looked like every other public school she had attended over the past few years, tired, overcrowded, and filled with the promise of yet another fresh start that probably wouldn't last. She pulled her worn backpack over her shoulder and took a deep breath, tasting the familiar mixture of anxiety and resignation that came with being the new kid for the 7th time in 4 years. At 17, Sarah had learned to read a school's social hierarchy within minutes of walking through its doors. She could spot the popular kids, the athletes, the drama nerds, and the outcasts with the precision of a military strategist. It was a survival skill she had developed out of necessity, moving from base to base with her father during his military career, and later bouncing between foster homes when that life fell apart. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and students were already clustering in their familiar groups across the courtyard. Sarah noticed how they moved with the easy confidence of people who belonged somewhere, who had friends waiting for them, who didn't have to wonder where they would sit at lunch or whom they could trust with their locker combination. She checked her schedule one more time, though she had memorized it the night before. First period, Advanced Mathematics with Mr. Chen. Second period, English Literature with Mrs. Rodriguez. Third period, Physical Education with Coach Thompson. The thought of gym class made her stomach twist slightly. PE was always the worst for new students, all that forced interaction, team selection, and the inevitable moment when someone would ask why she was so good at certain activities while struggling with others. The warning bell rang, and Sarah joined the stream of students flowing toward the main entrance. She kept her head down, a habit that had served her well over the years. Don't make eye contact. Don't stand out. Don't give anyone a reason to notice you until you understand the landscape. But, as she walked through the crowded hallway, Sarah couldn't help but notice the way some students seemed to command space around them. There was a group near the lockers that other kids gave a wide berth, and Sarah's trained eye immediately identified them as potential trouble. 3 girls and 2 boys, all wearing designer clothes that screamed money and attitude. The lead girl had platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves and was holding court like a queen addressing her subjects. "Did you see what Jessica wore to the party last weekend?" the blonde was saying, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure the intended target could hear. "I mean, I get that not everyone can afford decent clothes, but there's no excuse for looking like you shop at thrift stores." A few students laughed, though it sounded forced. Sarah noticed a girl with dark hair and modest clothes hurrying past with her head down, clearly the target of the comment. The blonde's smile was sharp as a blade as she watched her victim retreat. Sarah had seen this dynamic countless times before. Every school had its version of this group, the self-appointed royalty who maintained their status by systematically tearing down anyone they perceived as a threat or simply as entertainment. She made a mental note to avoid them and continued toward her first class. Mr. Chen's mathematics classroom was a sanctuary of order and logic. Equations covered the whiteboard in neat, precise handwriting, and the teacher himself was a small, energetic man who clearly loved his subject. Sarah found a seat in the middle of the room, not too far back to seem disinterested, not too far forward to seem eager, and prepared to fade into the background. "Today we're going to explore advanced calculus concepts," Mr. Chen announced as the final bell rang. "I know some of you think math is just numbers and formulas, but it's really about patterns, logic, and problem solving. These skills apply to everything in life." As he began writing on the board, Sarah found herself genuinely interested. Mathematics had always come easily to her, perhaps because it was one of the few constants in her chaotic life. Numbers didn't change based on geography or social dynamics. A problem had a solution, and if you applied the right process, you could find it. When Mr. Chen asked for someone to solve a particularly complex equation, Sarah hesitated for a moment before raising her hand. Several students turned to look at her with surprise. The new girl actually knew something. "Excellent work, Miss Martinez," Mr. Chen said after she correctly worked through the problem on the board. "You clearly have a strong mathematical background." Sarah nodded politely and returned to her seat, trying to ignore the whispers that followed. She had learned the hard way that demonstrating intelligence too early could paint a target on your back, but sometimes the urge to engage with a subject she actually enjoyed overrode her caution. English literature was less engaging, mainly because Mrs. Rodriguez seemed determined to squeeze every ounce of symbolism out of The Great Gatsby, whether it was actually there or not. Sarah dutifully took notes and participated minimally, just enough to avoid being called on for not paying attention. It was during the break between second and third period that Sarah had her first real interaction with the school's social structure. She was at her locker, trying to remember the combination she had written down somewhere in her backpack, when she heard raised voices nearby. "I'm telling you, it's not my fault you can't handle the routine," a familiar voice was saying. Sarah recognized it as belonging to the blonde from the morning. "Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time practicing, you could keep up." "I've been on this team for 3 years, Madison," another girl replied, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I've never had a problem keeping up before." "Well, things change," Madison said with a shrug. "Maybe it's time you accepted that you're just not cheerleader material anymore." Sarah glanced over and saw the confrontation playing out near the trophy case. Madison was facing off against a girl with auburn hair who was clearly fighting back tears. Several other students had stopped to watch, though most seemed uncomfortable with the public humiliation they were witnessing. "You can't just kick me off the team because you don't like me," the auburn-haired girl said, her voice growing stronger. "Watch me," Madison replied. "I'm captain, and what I say goes. Clean out your locker after school." The girl, Amy, Sarah had heard someone call her, looked around desperately for support, but the other cheerleaders were studying their shoes, and the gathered crowd was more interested in the drama than in justice. She grabbed her books and pushed past the crowd, tears finally spilling over. Madison watched her go with satisfaction, then turned to address her audience. "Sorry you all had to witness that," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the good of the team." Sarah felt a familiar burning in her chest, the same feeling she got when she witnessed any kind of bullying or injustice. It was the same feeling that had gotten her in trouble at her last school when she couldn't stand by and watch a kid get beaten up for his lunch money. But she forced herself to stay calm, to remember that she was the new girl here, that she didn't understand all the dynamics yet, and that getting involved would only make her a target. She finally got her locker open and gathered her books for PE, trying to push the scene out of her mind. But as she walked toward the gymnasium, she couldn't shake the image of Amy's devastated face or the cruel satisfaction in Madison's eyes. The gymnasium was a typical high school setup: polished wooden floors, retractable bleachers, and the perpetual smell of cleaning products mixed with teenage sweat. Coach Thompson was a large woman with graying hair and the no-nonsense demeanor that seemed to be standard issue for PE teachers. "All right, ladies," she announced as the class gathered in the center of the gym. "Today we're starting our self-defense unit. I know some of you think this is just an excuse to beat each other up, but self-defense is a serious life skill that every young woman should have." Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. Self-defense training would require her to demonstrate skills that might raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. She had spent years learning to hide her capabilities, to appear average and unremarkable. "I need a volunteer to help demonstrate some basic techniques," Coach Thompson continued, scanning the group of girls. Her eyes landed on Sarah. "You're new, right? What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez, ma'am," Sarah replied automatically, the respectful address slipping out before she could stop it. "Ma'am?" Madison's voice cut through the group like a blade. "What is this, military school?" Several girls giggled, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had spent so many years around military personnel and veterans that the formal address was second nature, but she realized how it must sound to her civilian peers. "It's just how I was raised," Sarah said quietly. "Were you raised in the 1950s? Madison continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "Or maybe in some kind of religious cult?" "That's enough," Coach Thompson said firmly. "Sarah, thank you for volunteering. Come up here and I'll show everyone some basic escape techniques." As Sarah stepped forward, she caught Madison whispering to her friends. $10 says the new girl cries when someone actually grabs her, she heard Madison say. Coach Thompson began demonstrating a simple wrist escape technique, using Sarah as her partner. Now, when someone grabs your wrist like this, she said, taking hold of Sarah's arm, the natural instinct is to pull away, but that's actually the least effective response. Sarah nodded and played along, allowing herself to be grabbed and following Coach Thompson's instructions for the basic escape. But she could feel Madison's eyes on her, and she had the distinct impression that this was some kind of test. Now I want everyone to pair up and practice, Coach Thompson announced. Sarah, you can work with. I'll take her, Madison said quickly, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'd love to help the new girl learn the ropes. Sarah's internal alarm bells were ringing, but she couldn't refuse without seeming afraid. Sure, she said calmly. I appreciate the help. Madison's grip when she grabbed Sarah's wrist was unnecessarily tight, her fingers digging in with obvious intent to cause discomfort. So, Sarah, she said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold, where exactly did you move here from? Texas, Sarah replied, focusing on the escape technique Coach Thompson had demonstrated. Military family? Madison pressed, tightening her grip even more. You've got that whole yes ma'am, no ma'am thing going on. Something like that, Sarah said, easily executing the wrist escape despite Madison's attempt to make it difficult. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly. She clearly hadn't expected Sarah to break free so easily. Interesting, she said. Let's try it again, but this time I'll really hold on tight. What followed was a subtle but escalating game of dominance. Madison would grab Sarah's wrist with increasing force and aggression, clearly trying to intimidate or hurt her, and Sarah would calmly execute the escape technique, her movements becoming more precise and efficient with each repetition. You're pretty good at this, Madison said, though her tone suggested this wasn't entirely a compliment. Have you done self-defense before? A little, Sarah replied honestly. My dad thought it was important. Your dad? Madison's interest sharpened. What does he do? Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came whenever someone asked about her family. He's not around anymore, she said quietly. She expected Madison to back off at this revelation, but, instead, the girl seemed to sense vulnerability. Oh, that's tough, Madison said with fake sympathy. Divorce? He died, Sarah said simply, hoping to end the conversation. But Madison pressed on. How? Madison, one of her friends called out, Coach is watching. Madison glanced over and saw that Coach Thompson was indeed observing their practice. She released Sarah's wrist and stepped back, but her expression made it clear that this conversation wasn't over. For the rest of the class, Sarah tried to focus on the techniques they were learning, but she could feel Madison's group watching her, whispering among themselves. She recognized the pattern, they were testing her, probing for weaknesses, trying to figure out where she fit in their social ecosystem. When the bell rang, Sarah gathered her things quickly, hoping to escape before any further confrontation. But, as she headed toward the locker room, Madison stepped into her path. Sarah, right? Madison said, blocking her way. We should talk sometime. Get to know each other better. Sure, Sarah replied neutrally, stepping around her. I mean it, Madison called after her. I like to know all about the new students. Especially ones with interesting backgrounds. Sarah continued walking without looking back, but she could feel the weight of Madison's stare between her shoulder blades. As she changed out of her gym clothes, she overheard Madison talking to her friends in the next row of lockers. There's something off about that girl, Madison was saying. Did you see how she handled those self-defense moves? And the way she stands, the way she talks? Something doesn't add up. Maybe she's just confident, one of the other girls suggested. No, Madison said firmly. It's more than that. Trust me, I can spot a fake from a mile away. Little Miss Perfect is hiding something, and I'm going to find out what it is. Sarah finished changing and left the locker room as quickly as possible, but Madison's words echoed in her mind. She had been careful, she thought. She had tried to blend in, to appear normal and unremarkable. But, apparently, it hadn't been enough. As she walked to her next class, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. She had already identified the key players in the school's social hierarchy, witnessed an act of cruelty that made her blood boil, and apparently attracted the attention of the most dangerous person in the building. It was, even by her standards, a remarkably eventful first day. The rest of her classes passed in a blur of introductions, syllabi, and the usual first-day administrative tasks. Sarah paid attention, took notes, and tried to project an image of a normal, slightly shy new student. But, all the while, she was aware of the whispers that seemed to follow her through the hallways, the curious glances from other students, and the feeling that she was being observed and evaluated. At lunch, she found a quiet table in the corner of the cafeteria and ate the sandwich she had packed while reading a book. This was another survival strategy she had perfected: if you looked busy and unapproachable, people were less likely to bother you. It also gave her the opportunity to observe the social dynamics playing out around her. Madison's table was, predictably, the center of attention. She held court with her usual group of followers, but Sarah noticed that the composition had changed since the morning. Amy, the girl who had been kicked off the cheerleading team, was noticeably absent. Instead, a new girl had taken her place, younger, prettier, and clearly eager to please. Sarah watched as Madison systematically demolished a series of targets during lunch. A boy's new haircut was interesting. A girl's outfit was brave. A teacher's assignment was so creative. Each comment was delivered with a smile and received with nervous laughter from the target, who couldn't quite tell if they were being complimented or insulted. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Sarah recognized it for what it was. Madison wasn't just mean, she was strategic. She understood how to maintain power through a careful balance of fear, admiration, and uncertainty. People wanted to please her because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. As Sarah was finishing her lunch, she noticed Amy sitting alone at a table near the windows. The girl looked miserable, picking at a salad while tears threatened to spill over again. Without really thinking about it, Sarah found herself standing up and walking over. "Mind if I sit?" she asked quietly. Amy looked up with surprise. "You're the new girl, right? Sarah?" "That's right," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from Amy. "Rough day?" Amy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could say that. I got kicked off the cheerleading team this morning by someone who used to be my best friend." "Madison? You've already heard about it?" Amy asked, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I saw it happen," Sarah admitted. "I'm sorry. That looked really painful." Amy studied Sarah's face, apparently surprised by the genuine sympathy she found there. "You don't even know me," she said. "Why would you care?" Sarah considered this question. Why did she care? She had learned over the years that getting involved in other people's drama was usually a mistake. It made you a target, complicated your life, and rarely actually helped anyone. But there was something about the casual cruelty she had witnessed that morning that she couldn't let go. "I guess I don't like bullies," Sarah said simply. "Madison's not a bully," Amy said automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. She's under a lot of pressure. Her parents expect her to be perfect, and she takes that out on other people sometimes." Sarah recognized this pattern too, the victim defending their abuser, making excuses for behavior that was clearly wrong. "Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty," she said gently. Amy looked surprised by the directness of the statement. "You don't understand," she said. "Madison has a lot of power here. If you get on her bad side." "What? What happens?" Amy glanced around nervously, as if Madison might be listening from across the crowded cafeteria. "Things get difficult," she said vaguely. "People stop talking to you. Teachers start treating you differently. You become invisible, or worse, you become a target. And that's why people put up with her behavior?" "It's not that simple," Amy insisted. "Madison can be really great when she wants to be. She's smart and funny and generous. It's just. She has this need to control everything around her," Amy finished quietly. "And if you threaten that control, she destroys you." Sarah nodded, filing this information away. "How long were you friends?" Since kindergarten, Amy said, her voice breaking slightly. We grew up together. I was the maid of honor at her older sister's wedding last year. She was supposed to be the maid of honor at mine someday. What changed? Amy was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the courtyard where students were enjoying the warm afternoon sun. I started dating someone she didn't approve of, she finally said. Jake Morrison. He's not popular enough for her standards, apparently. She told me to break up with him, and, when I refused. She gestured helplessly at the empty space around their table. She kicked you off the team for dating someone she doesn't like? She said it was because I was gaining weight and couldn't keep up with the routines anymore, Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. In front of everyone. Sarah felt that familiar burning sensation in her chest again. She had witnessed many forms of cruelty over the years, but there was something particularly vicious about using someone's insecurities as weapons. That's not okay, she said firmly. Amy looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear. You should be careful, she said. I saw Madison watching you during PE today. When she gets that look in her eyes, it means she's planning something. Let her plan, Sarah said, her voice harder than she had intended. Amy's eyes widened. You don't understand. Madison doesn't just spread rumors or exclude people. She's more creative than that. Last year, she convinced half the school that Jenny Phillips was stealing from the drama department's costume fund. Jenny ended up having to transfer schools. Was she actually stealing? Of course not. But Madison planted evidence and had witnesses ready to back up her story. Jenny never had a chance. Sarah absorbed this information with growing unease. She had dealt with bullies before, but they were usually straightforward in their cruelty. Physical intimidation, name-calling, simple exclusion. Madison sounded like something more dangerous, a manipulator with intelligence, resources, and no apparent moral constraints. Why are you telling me all this? Sarah asked. Amy shrugged. Maybe because you're the first person in months who's bothered to ask if I'm okay. Or maybe because I've seen what happens to people who cross Madison, and I don't want to watch it happen to someone else. The warning bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. As students began clearing their tables and heading to afternoon classes, Amy gathered her things and stood up. Thanks for sitting with me, she said. But, Sarah? Be careful. Madison doesn't forgive, and she doesn't forget. As Amy walked away, Sarah remained seated for a moment, processing the conversation. She had been in the building for less than 6 hours and had already managed to attract the attention of the school's most dangerous social predator. It was, even by her standards, impressively efficient. But, as she finally stood and headed to her afternoon classes, Sarah realized that she wasn't afraid. Madison might be clever and ruthless, but she was still just a high school girl with too much power and not enough supervision. Sarah had faced much worse threats than a teenage queen bee with boundary issues. What concerned her more was the effect Madison was having on people like Amy, the systematic destruction of self-esteem, the isolation from support systems, the careful erosion of anyone who might challenge her authority. Sarah had spent years learning to blend in, to avoid conflict, to survive in hostile environments without making waves. But, watching Amy walk away with her shoulders hunched in defeat, Sarah felt something stirring inside her that she had been trying to suppress for months. It was the same feeling that had driven her to join the Navy in the first place, the same instinct that had made her volunteer for the most dangerous assignments, the same core belief that had guided every major decision in her adult life. Some fights were worth having, regardless of the personal cost. As she walked into her history classroom for 6th period, Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, decorated veteran, and survivor of combat operations that most people couldn't even imagine, decided that maybe it was time to stop hiding who she really was. Madison Carter had no idea what she was about to unleash. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel sharper, more alive. Sarah had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of her first day and Amy's warnings about Madison. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with the same analytical precision she had once used to assess mission parameters. At 17, Sarah looked younger than her years, which had always been both an advantage and a frustration. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her brown eyes held depths that most people mistook for shyness rather than the watchful alertness of someone who had seen too much. She was small for her age, 5 feet 4 inches and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, which had made her an unlikely candidate for the Navy SEALs and an even more unlikely target for high school bullies. But Sarah had learned long ago that appearance could be the most effective weapon in her arsenal. People looked at her and saw a quiet, harmless girl who posed no threat to anyone. They had no idea that she could kill them with her bare hands in 17 different ways, or that she had once held off an entire Taliban squad while her wounded teammates evacuated to safety. She dressed carefully in jeans and a simple blue sweater, nothing that would draw attention or suggest she was trying too hard. As she gathered her books and headed downstairs, Sarah thought about the choice she had made the day before. For months, she had been successfully maintaining her cover as an ordinary teenager. Her foster parents, the Hendersons, were kind but distant people who asked few questions and seemed content to provide her with room and board while she finished high school. They had no idea that their quiet foster daughter was a decorated war veteran struggling with PTSD and survivor's guilt. They didn't know about the nightmares that woke her most nights, or the way she instinctively catalogued exits and potential weapons in every room she entered. They certainly didn't know that she was capable of violence that would make their suburban nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. But, yesterday, watching Madison systematically destroy Amy's confidence and social standing, Sarah had felt something awakening inside her that she had been trying to suppress. It was the same protective instinct that had made her volunteer for the most dangerous missions, the same sense of justice that had driven her to enlist in the first place. Mrs. Henderson was already gone when Sarah reached the kitchen, leaving behind a note about a work conference and money for lunch. Mr. Henderson was hidden behind his newspaper, grunting acknowledgement when Sarah said goodbye. They were good people, Sarah knew, but they treated her more like a boarder than a family member. Which was probably for the best, considering how temporary all of her living situations tended to be. The drive to school gave Sarah time to think about strategy. If she was going to abandon her carefully constructed camouflage, she needed to do it intelligently. Madison was clearly a formidable opponent with significant resources and home field advantage. She had spent years building her power base, learning the weaknesses of her classmates, and establishing herself as the undisputed queen of Lincoln High. But Sarah had advantages that Madison couldn't possibly anticipate. She had been trained by the best military tacticians in the world, had survived situations that would break most people, and had learned to read human nature with the precision of a sniper's scope. More importantly, she had nothing to lose. The school parking lot was already busy when Sarah arrived, students clustering around cars and lockers in their familiar social groups. She noticed that Amy was standing alone near the bus drop-off area, looking smaller and more isolated than ever. Madison's group was holding court near the main entrance, their laughter carrying across the courtyard with the sharp edge of exclusion. As Sarah walked toward the building, she became aware that she was being watched. Not obviously, but with the subtle attention of predators sizing up potential prey. Madison's friends were tracking her movement, taking note of her clothes, her posture, her apparent confidence level. Sarah recognized the behavior from countless reconnaissance missions, the careful gathering of intelligence before an operation. She found Amy at her locker, struggling with books that kept falling out of her overstuffed bag. The girl's hands were shaking slightly, and Sarah could see the telltale signs of someone who hadn't slept well. "Hey," Sarah said quietly, stepping up beside Amy's locker. "How are you holding up?" Amy looked around nervously before answering. "I'm okay," she said, but her voice suggested otherwise. "Thanks for yesterday, by the way. It meant a lot." "What are friends for?" Sarah replied, though they both knew their acquaintance was less than 24 hours old. Amy's eyes widened slightly at the word friends, as if she had forgotten what that meant. "You should be careful," she whispered, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Madison's been asking questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from, why you moved here, what your family situation is." "She's got people looking into your background." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. If Madison was conducting any kind of serious investigation into her past, she might uncover information that Sarah wasn't ready to share. Her military service was supposed to be confidential while she was a minor, but there were ways to find information if someone was determined enough. "What did you tell her?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Amy said quickly. "I don't know anything to tell." "But, Sarah, when Madison gets curious about someone, it usually means she's planning something big. She's like a cat playing with a mouse, she likes to understand her prey before she pounces." The first warning bell rang, and students began moving toward their classrooms with the resigned shuffle of people heading to prison sentences. Sarah walked Amy to her first period class, noting how other students seemed to actively avoid making eye contact with either of them. Amy's social exile was apparently complete and contagious. Sarah's first 2 classes passed without incident, though she noticed Madison's friends in both rooms, sitting where they could observe her without being obvious about it. During English literature, one of them, a redhead named Jessica, made a point of asking Mrs. Rodriguez about transfer students and whether their previous grades counted toward class ranking. It was a transparent fishing expedition, but Mrs. Rodriguez was too focused on her lesson plan to catch the subtext. It was during the break between second and third period that Madison made her first direct move. Sarah was at her locker when she heard footsteps approaching behind her. She didn't turn around, but she could see Madison's reflection in the small mirror attached to her locker door. The girl was flanked by 3 of her friends, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested this wasn't a casual encounter. "Sarah!" Madison called out, her voice bright with fake friendliness. "I've been hoping to catch up with you." Sarah closed her locker and turned around, keeping her expression neutral. "Hi, Madison. What's up?" "Well, I was thinking," Madison said, stepping closer, "that we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I'd like to make it up to you." "That's nice of you," Sarah replied, though every instinct was telling her this was a trap. "I'm having a party this Saturday night," Madison continued. "Nothing too crazy, just a small gathering of friends. I'd love for you to come." Sarah noticed that Madison's friends were positioned strategically around them, blocking potential escape routes and ensuring that their conversation was being witnessed by as many passing students as possible. Whatever Madison was planning, she wanted it to be public. "That's very kind," Sarah said carefully, "but I'm not much of a party person." "Oh, come on," Madison pressed, her smile becoming slightly more predatory. "It'll be fun. Besides, it's important for new students to make connections, don't you think? Build relationships?" The word relationships was loaded with meaning that Sarah couldn't quite decipher yet, but she recognized the underlying threat. This wasn't really an invitation, it was a summons. "I'll think about it," Sarah said, starting to move away. "Actually," Madison said, stepping to block her path, "I insist." "Really? It would mean so much to me if you came." Now other students were stopping to watch the interaction, sensing drama in the air. Sarah realized that Madison had orchestrated this moment carefully, a public invitation that would be impossible to refuse without seeming rude or antisocial. If Sarah declined, Madison would have ammunition to paint her as unfriendly or stuck-up. If she accepted, she would be walking into whatever trap Madison had prepared. "Okay," Sarah said finally. "I'll be there." Madison's smile widened, and, for just a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of genuine pleasure in her eyes. "Wonderful," Madison said. "Saturday at 8. I'll text you my address." As Madison and her entourage swept away, Sarah noticed Amy watching from across the hallway with an expression of horror and sympathy. The message was clear: Sarah had just accepted an invitation to her own execution. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of speculation and dread. Word of Madison's invitation spread through the school with the speed of wildfire, and Sarah found herself the subject of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Some students looked at her with pity, as if she were a lamb being led to slaughter. Others watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a gladiator match. During PE, Coach Thompson announced that they would continue their self-defense unit, but this time with a different focus. "Today we're going to work on situational awareness and threat assessment," she said as the class gathered in the center of the gym. Self-defense isn't just about physical techniques, it's about recognizing dangerous situations before they escalate and knowing when to avoid a fight altogether. Sarah found herself paired with Jessica, the redhead who had been asking questions about her in English class. Unlike Madison's aggressive approach the day before, Jessica seemed more interested in casual conversation. "So, you're going to Madison's party on Saturday?" Jessica asked as they practiced basic defensive stances. Apparently, Sarah replied. "That's exciting. Madison's parties are always memorable." Something in Jessica's tone made Sarah look at her more carefully. "Memorable how?" Jessica hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more. "Madison likes to play games," she said finally. "Social games. They can be intense." "What kind of games?" "Truth or dare." "Never have I ever." "Things that get people to reveal secrets or do embarrassing things." Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper. Last year, she convinced Jenny Phillips to admit she had feelings for her English teacher. The whole thing was recorded and uploaded to social media before Jenny even realized what had happened. Sarah felt her blood run cold. This was Madison's strategy: create situations where people would compromise themselves voluntarily, then use that information as leverage or entertainment. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. Jessica looked around nervously before answering. "Because you seem nice," she said quietly. "And because I've seen what Madison does to people she doesn't like. I don't want to watch it happen to someone else." "Then, why do you hang around with her?" Jessica's laugh was bitter. "Because the alternative is worse. At least when you're part of her group, you're protected. When you're outside it." She gestured helplessly. "Look at Amy." As if summoned by their conversation, Amy appeared at Sarah's side during the next rotation. Coach Thompson had divided the class into groups of 3 for a new exercise, and Amy had apparently been assigned to work with Sarah and Jessica. "Great," Jessica muttered under her breath, but she didn't object to Amy's presence. The exercise involved one person playing the role of an aggressor while the other 2 practiced de-escalation techniques. Sarah found herself in the middle, with Jessica and Amy taking turns playing the antagonist. "The key," Coach Thompson explained as she demonstrated, "is to project confidence without escalating the situation. You want to show that you're not an easy target, but you also don't want to provoke a fight you can't win." When it was Amy's turn to play the aggressor, she grabbed Sarah's shoulder with surprising force. "Hey," she said, her voice loud and confrontational. "You think you're better than everyone else?" For just a moment, Sarah's training took over. Her body tensed, her weight shifted to her back foot, and her hands moved into position for a devastating counterattack that would disable Amy before the girl knew what hit her. The move was so ingrained that it was almost automatic: identify threat, neutralize threat, assess for additional hostiles. But Sarah caught herself just in time, forcing her muscles to relax and her stance to return to the awkward uncertainty that Coach Thompson had demonstrated. "I'm sorry if I gave you that impression," Sarah said, following the script they had been given. "I don't think I'm better than anyone." "Yes, you do," Amy continued, getting into her role. "You walk around here like you own the place, looking down on everyone." "I'm new here," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm just trying to fit in." Jessica, who was supposed to be observing and taking notes, was instead watching Sarah with fascination. "You're really good at this," she said when the exercise was over. "Good at what?" "Staying calm under pressure. Most people get flustered when someone gets in their face like that, but you barely reacted." Sarah shrugged, hoping to downplay the observation. "I just don't like conflict." But Jessica continued to study her with new interest, and Sarah realized she might have revealed more than she intended. In trying to hide her combat training, she had instead demonstrated a level of composure and situational awareness that was almost as telling. After Sarah found herself walking to lunch with Amy, who seemed determined to continue their conversation from the day before. "I heard Madison invited you to her party," Amy said as they entered the cafeteria. "News travels fast around here." "Sarah, you can't go to that party." "I'm serious. Madison is planning something." How do you know? Amy glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Because I know Madison. When she wants to destroy someone, she does it in front of an audience. She wants people to watch, to learn what happens when you cross her. What makes you think she wants to destroy me? I've been here exactly 1 day. That's exactly why, Amy said urgently. You're new, which means you don't know the rules yet. You talked to me yesterday, which puts you in the category of social undesirables. And, worst of all, you're not intimidated by her. Madison can sense that, and it terrifies her. Sarah considered this as they found a table near the windows. So what do you think she's planning? I don't know specifically, but I can guess the general shape of it. She'll create a situation where you're pressured to do something embarrassing or reveal something private. She'll make sure it's all recorded. Then, she'll use that to destroy your reputation and establish her dominance over you. And, if I don't go to the party? Then, she'll paint you as antisocial and use that to turn people against you. Either way, she wins. Sarah picked at her sandwich, thinking. Has anyone ever successfully stood up to her? Amy was quiet for a long moment. There was a girl last year, she said finally. Tori Brennan. She was a transfer student too, and she didn't back down when Madison tried to intimidate her. What happened? Madison destroyed her. Completely. By the end of the semester, Tori had no friends, no reputation, and no future at this school. She transferred again after Christmas break. How? Amy looked uncomfortable. Madison found out that Tori's dad was in prison for drunk driving. She made sure everyone knew about it. She also spread rumors that Tori was dealing drugs to pay for her mom's medical bills. None of it was true, but Madison had evidence to back up her claims. What kind of evidence? The kind you can create if you're creative enough and have resources, Amy said grimly. Madison's parents are lawyers, and they've taught her a lot about how to build a convincing case, even if it's based on lies. Sarah absorbed this information with growing unease. Madison wasn't just a typical high school bully, she was someone with intelligence, resources, and apparently no moral constraints about using them to destroy people who got in her way. Amy, Sarah said carefully, what would it take to stop someone like Madison? Hypothetically. Amy looked at her with alarm. You can't be thinking about fighting her. Sarah, Madison doesn't fight fair, and she doesn't fight alone. She has resources you can't imagine. Like what? Money, first of all. Her parents are rich enough to buy and sell this entire town. Connections, her family knows judges, police officers, school board members. And information, she's been collecting dirt on people for years. She could probably blackmail half the teachers in this school if she wanted to. Sarah nodded, filing this information away with the same methodical precision she had once used to plan military operations. Madison was indeed a formidable opponent, but every enemy had weaknesses. The key was finding them before Saturday night. The afternoon passed quickly, with Sarah attending her remaining classes while her mind worked on the problem of Madison Carter. By the time the final bell rang, she had the outline of a plan forming in her head. It was risky, potentially disastrous, and completely contrary to everything she had been trying to accomplish since leaving the military. But, as she walked to her car and saw Amy sitting alone on the front steps of the school, looking defeated and isolated, Sarah knew that some fights were worth the risk. That evening, Sarah sat in her bedroom with her laptop open, researching everything she could find about Madison Carter and her family. It didn't take long to confirm what Amy had told her: the Carters were indeed wealthy and well-connected. Madison's father was a partner in one of the city's most prestigious law firms, and her mother served on the boards of several charitable organizations. But wealth and connections also meant visibility, and visibility meant vulnerability. The Carters had reputations to protect, image to maintain, and social standing to consider. If Madison was used to wielding power without consequences, it was probably because no one had ever made those consequences personal enough to matter. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hi Sarah. It's Madison. Can't wait to see you Saturday. My address is 1247 Elm Street. Party starts at 8. Dress casually. Zoxo. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thanks for the invitation. See you Saturday." As she hit send, Sarah realized that she had just committed to a course of action that could change everything. For months, she had been trying to be invisible, to blend in, to avoid the kind of attention that came with being different. But maybe it was time to stop hiding who she really was. Maybe it was time for Madison Carter to learn that some prey fought back. The next few days passed in a strange suspended animation. Madison continued her campaign of subtle intimidation, making sure Sarah was aware of her power and influence. Jessica and the other members of Madison's inner circle took turns engaging Sarah in seemingly innocent conversations that were clearly designed to gather information. Meanwhile, Amy grew increasingly anxious about Saturday night, repeatedly warning Sarah about the danger she was walking into. Other students seemed to be watching Sarah with a mixture of fascination and pity, as if she were a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. But Sarah used the time productively, conducting her own reconnaissance mission. She learned about Madison's previous victims, the tactics she favored, and the resources at her disposal. She also began to understand the ecosystem that allowed someone like Madison to thrive, the combination of fear, admiration, and complicity that kept her in power. Most importantly, Sarah began to remember who she really was beneath the careful camouflage she had constructed. She was a Navy SEAL, trained by the best warriors in the world, tested in combat against enemies who fought with real weapons instead of gossip and social media. Madison Carter had no idea what she was about to face. Friday morning arrived with Sarah feeling more like herself than she had in months. She dressed carefully, not to impress, but to project the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to fear from high school social politics. As she walked through the halls of Lincoln High, she moved with the measured stride of someone who owned the ground beneath their feet. Madison noticed the change immediately. During their brief encounter at lunch, her eyes narrowed as she studied Sarah's altered demeanor. "You seem different today," Madison observed, her voice carefully neutral. "Do I?" Sarah replied mildly. "I'm just looking forward to tomorrow night." Something in Sarah's tone made Madison's smile falter slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, I'm glad you're excited. It's going to be a night to remember." "I'm counting on it," Sarah said, and this time there was no mistaking the steel in her voice. As Saturday evening approached, Sarah prepared for battle with the same methodical attention to detail she had once used before dangerous missions. She showered, dressed in jeans and a simple black sweater, and tied her hair back in a practical ponytail. She looked like exactly what Madison expected, a nervous teenager trying too hard to fit in. But, underneath her civilian clothes, Sarah Carter was ready for war. As she drove toward Elm Street and whatever trap Madison had prepared, Sarah thought about all the reasons she had for walking away. She could transfer schools again, start over somewhere else, continue her careful masquerade of normalcy. But, then, she thought about Amy's broken spirit, about all the other victims Madison had destroyed over the years, about the systematic cruelty that flourished in environments where good people chose to stay silent. Sarah had spent her entire adult life fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She wasn't about to stop now just because the battlefield had changed. Madison Carter was about to learn that some new girls came with baggage she couldn't handle. The Carter house sat on Elm Street like a monument to suburban success, its perfectly manicured lawn and imposing colonial facade announcing the family's wealth and status to anyone who drove past. Sarah parked her modest Honda between a BMW and a Mercedes, feeling like an infiltrator in enemy territory. Through the tall windows, she could see the warm glow of lights and the silhouettes of teenagers moving around inside. She sat in her car for a moment, studying the house with the same analytical precision she had once used to assess hostile compounds in Afghanistan. 2 stories, multiple exit points, large open spaces that would be difficult to control if things went sideways. The driveway was circular, providing easy access for emergency vehicles if needed. The neighbors' houses were close enough that noise would carry, but far enough away that screams might not. Sarah shook her head, realizing that her mind was automatically shifting into tactical assessment mode. This wasn't a military operation, she reminded herself. It was just a high school party hosted by a spoiled teenager with delusions of grandeur. But, as she walked up the stone pathway to the front door, every instinct honed by years of combat training was telling her that she was walking into danger. The door opened before she could knock, revealing Madison in a perfectly styled outfit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly living allowance. Her blonde hair was arranged in artful waves, and her makeup was applied with professional precision. She looked like she was ready for a magazine photo shoot rather than a casual party. "Sarah!" Madison exclaimed, her voice bright with what sounded like genuine enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you came. Come in, come in." Sarah stepped into a foyer that could have housed her entire apartment, complete with marble floors, crystal chandelier, and what looked like original artwork on the walls. The sound of music and laughter drifted from deeper in the house, along with the unmistakable smell of alcohol. "Wow," Sarah said, looking around with appropriate awe. "Your house is incredible." "Thanks," Madison replied with the casual tone of someone who had never known anything different. "My parents are in Europe for the week, so we have the place to ourselves." Of course they were, Sarah thought. Madison had planned this carefully, ensuring that there would be no adult supervision and no witnesses to whatever she had planned. Madison led Sarah through a series of rooms that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a family home. The living room was filled with teenagers Sarah recognized from school, most of them drinking from red Solo cups and trying to look more sophisticated than their ages allowed. Music was playing from a sound system that probably cost more than Sarah's car, and someone had dimmed the lights to create what they obviously thought was a romantic atmosphere. "Let me get you a drink," Madison said, guiding Sarah toward a wet bar in the corner of the room. "What would you like?" "Just a soda, thanks," Sarah replied. Madison's smile flickered slightly. "Are you sure? We've got everything: beer, wine, mixed drinks. My parents have an amazing liquor collection." "I'm good with soda," Sarah insisted. "Oh, come on," Madison pressed, moving closer so that her voice wouldn't carry to the other guests. "Don't be boring. Everyone else is drinking." Sarah recognized the pressure tactic for what it was, the first small step in whatever larger plan Madison had prepared. Get the target to compromise their principles in some small way, then use that as leverage for bigger compromises later. "I'm the designated driver," Sarah said with a shrug. "Can't afford to lose my license." It was a reasonable excuse that Madison couldn't argue with without seeming irresponsible, but Sarah could see the frustration in her eyes. Whatever Madison had planned apparently required Sarah to be intoxicated or at least impaired. "Of course," Madison said with forced understanding. "How responsible of you." She poured Sarah a Coke from a bottle that looked untouched, but Sarah noticed the brief moment when Madison's body blocked her view of the glass. When Madison handed her the drink, Sarah accepted it with a smile and took a small sip, noting the slightly bitter aftertaste that shouldn't have been there. "This is good," Sarah said, though she had no intention of drinking any more of it. "What kind of Coke is this?" "Just the regular kind," Madison replied, though her eyes were watching Sarah's face carefully. "Maybe it tastes different because it's in a glass instead of a can." Sarah nodded and pretended to take another sip while Madison introduced her to various party guests. Most of them were members of Madison's inner circle or people desperate to gain acceptance into it. They all seemed friendly enough on the surface, but Sarah noticed how they watched her with the intensity of scientists observing a lab experiment. The party continued for about an hour with typical teenage activities, music, dancing, gossip, and increasingly loud conversations as the alcohol took effect. Sarah nursed her doctored drink and played the role of the shy new girl trying to fit in. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny, nodded along with conversations she didn't care about, and pretended not to notice the way various guests kept trying to encourage her to drink more. Around 9:30, Madison began gathering people in the living room with the announcement that they were going to play some games. "Nothing too crazy," she said with a smile that suggested the opposite. "Just some fun icebreakers to help everyone get to know each other better." Sarah recognized the moment for what it was, the transition from the setup phase to the actual operation. Whatever Madison had planned was about to begin. The group arranged themselves in a circle on the plush carpet, about 15 teenagers in various states of intoxication sitting cross-legged like they were at summer camp. Madison positioned herself directly across from Sarah, with her closest allies flanked around her like generals preparing for battle. "Okay, everyone," Madison announced, "we're going to start with a classic, truth or dare. But we're going to make it more interesting with some house rules." She produced a deck of cards from seemingly nowhere and spread them face down in the center of the circle. Everyone draws a card. If you get a red card, you have to answer a truth question. If you get a black card, you have to do a dare. And here's the fun part, the person across from you gets to choose your challenge. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she realized the elegant simplicity of Madison's trap. With Madison sitting directly across from her, any card Sarah drew would result in a challenge chosen by her tormentor. It was a rigged game designed to put Sarah in an impossible position. "That sounds fun," one of the guys said, his words slightly slurred from alcohol. "What kind of questions and dares are we talking about?" "Nothing too extreme," Madison said with false innocence. "Just things that help us learn about each other. Personal stories, embarrassing moments, maybe some harmless physical challenges." Sarah noticed several people exchanging glances around the circle, and she realized that at least some of the guests were aware of what was really happening. They weren't just party attendees, they were audience members for whatever performance Madison had planned. "Who wants to go first?" Madison asked, looking directly at Sarah. "I'll do it," Sarah said before anyone else could volunteer. If Madison wanted to play games, she might as well get it over with. Sarah reached for the deck and drew a card, keeping it face down as Madison had instructed. Around the circle, other guests leaned forward with anticipation, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "Red or black?" Madison asked, her voice practically purring with satisfaction. Sarah flipped the card over to reveal the ace of spades. "Black." Madison's smile widened. "Dare it is." "How exciting." She paused for dramatic effect, making sure she had everyone's attention. "Sarah, I dare you to tell us the real reason your father isn't around anymore." The circle fell silent except for the sound of music still playing in the background. Sarah felt every eye in the room focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such a personal and invasive challenge. It was a masterful opening move, Sarah had to admit. Madison had somehow learned about Sarah's family situation and was using it as a weapon. The dare was designed to force Sarah to either reveal painful personal information or refuse to play, which would make her look antisocial and ruin any chance she had of fitting in. "That's not really a dare," Sarah said calmly. "That's more of a truth question." The card was black, Madison replied sweetly. "I dare you to tell us the truth about your father." Several people around the circle shifted uncomfortably, apparently recognizing that Madison had crossed a line. But no one spoke up to object, and Sarah realized that this was how Madison maintained her power, by creating situations where people were complicit in her cruelty through their silence. Sarah looked around the circle, studying the faces of her audience. Some looked eager for drama, others seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene, and a few appeared genuinely sympathetic. But all of them were waiting to see what she would do. "My father was a Marine," Sarah said quietly. "He died in Afghanistan when I was 14. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Madison seemed taken aback by the simple honesty of the response, as if she had expected Sarah to refuse or break down in tears. "I'm sorry," one of the girls said softly. "That must have been really hard." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "It was." Madison quickly regained her composure. "That's so sad," she said with obviously fake sympathy. "But that's not the whole story, is it? I heard there was more to it than that." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If Madison had been investigating her background, she might have uncovered information about the circumstances of her father's death, or worse, about Sarah's own military service. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Madison's smile was sharp as a blade. "Well, I heard that your father wasn't exactly a hero. I heard he was court-martialed for something before he died. Something embarrassing." Now the silence in the room was toxic, loaded with the kind of tension that preceded either violence or complete social destruction. Madison had just publicly called Sarah's dead father a disgrace, in front of a room full of witnesses. Sarah felt something stirring inside her chest that she had been suppressing for months. It was the same cold rage that had once allowed her to eliminate enemy combatants without hesitation, the same lethal calm that had made her one of the most effective operators in her unit. "You don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice so quiet that people had to strain to hear her. "Don't I?" Madison pressed, clearly sensing that she was getting the reaction she wanted. "I did some research, Sarah. It's amazing what you can find out about people when you know where to look." Sarah slowly set her glass down on the coffee table beside her, the movement deliberate and controlled. Around the circle, some of the more perceptive guests seemed to sense that the atmosphere had shifted in a dangerous direction. "My father earned 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and a Bronze Star with Valor device," Sarah said, her voice still eerily calm. "He died leading a mission to rescue hostages from a Taliban compound. 8 American civilians came home alive because of what he did." Madison's confidence faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "That's not what I heard." You heard wrong," Sarah interrupted, and, for the first time, her voice carried an edge that made several people actually lean away from her. Madison seemed to realize that she was losing control of the situation, but, instead of backing down, she doubled down on her attack. "Well, even if that's true," Madison said, "it doesn't explain why you've been bouncing around foster homes for the past few years, does it? What's your story, Sarah? What are you really running from?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah realized that this was Madison's endgame. She was trying to force Sarah to reveal something humiliating or traumatic that could be used against her later. The entire party had been orchestrated to create this moment. Sarah looked around the circle one more time, seeing the faces of 15 teenagers who were waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Some looked excited by the conflict, others appeared uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene, and a few seemed genuinely concerned about how far Madison was willing to push. "You want to know what I'm running from?" Sarah asked, her voice still deadly quiet. "Yes," Madison said, leaning forward with anticipation. "I think we all do." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements controlled and precise. The change in her posture was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the shy, awkward teenager, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "I'm running from the memory of holding my best friend's intestines in my hands while we waited for a medevac helicopter that took 45 minutes to arrive," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I'm running from the sound that enemy combatants make when you break their necks. I'm running from the weight of 16 confirmed kills and the knowledge that every single one of them was someone's son." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the music seemed to have stopped, though Sarah knew that was just her perception shifting into the hyper-focused state that had once kept her alive in combat zones. "I'm running from 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL, from operations that are still classified and will remain classified for the next 20 years, Sarah continued, taking a step closer to Madison. "I'm running from a Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony that I couldn't attend because I was 17 years old and my service was supposed to be secret." Madison's face had gone completely pale, and several other party guests were staring at Sarah with expressions ranging from disbelief to terror. "So yes, Madison," Sarah said, now standing directly over the girl who had been so confident just moments before. "I am running from something. The question is whether you really want to keep chasing me." The transformation was complete now. Sarah Martinez, the shy new girl who just wanted to fit in, was gone. In her place stood Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs, veteran of operations that most people couldn't even imagine. Madison opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was completely out of her depth, facing an opponent who operated according to rules she didn't understand. "Now," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded life and death situations, "I think this party is over." She turned and walked toward the front door, moving with the measured stride of someone who owned every inch of ground they crossed. Behind her, the circle of teenagers remained frozen in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. As Sarah reached the foyer, she heard Madison's voice, shakier now but still defiant, "You can't just leave. We're not done here." Sarah paused at the front door and looked back at the girl who had been so confident about her ability to destroy people with words and social manipulation. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "We are." She walked out into the night air, feeling more like herself than she had in months. Behind her, the sounds of confused conversation and nervous laughter began to emerge from the house, but Sarah didn't look back. As she drove away from Elm Street, Sarah realized that everything had changed. Her carefully constructed cover was blown, her attempts at normalcy were over, and, by tomorrow morning, everyone at Lincoln High School would know exactly who she really was. But, for the first time since leaving the military, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely. Madison Carter had wanted to play games with someone she thought was helpless. She had just learned the difference between a victim and a predator. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah sat in her car in the Lincoln High parking lot, watching streams of students walking toward the building with an energy that seemed different from previous days. Word of what had happened at Madison's party had obviously spread, and Sarah could feel the shift in atmosphere even from a distance. She had spent Sunday in relative isolation, ignoring the dozens of text messages and missed calls that had flooded her phone throughout the weekend. Some were from numbers she didn't recognize, others from classmates she barely knew, and a few from people like Amy who seemed genuinely concerned about what would happen next. The messages ranged from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Some people wanted to know if what she had said was true. Others accused her of lying for attention. A few contained threats that might have been concerning if they had come from anyone more dangerous than suburban teenagers with too much time and too little real-world experience. But it was the silence from Madison that concerned Sarah the most. The girl who had built her reputation on swift and merciless retaliation had been completely quiet since Saturday night, which almost certainly meant she was planning something significant. As Sarah gathered her books and walked toward the school entrance, she noticed the way conversation seemed to stop when she passed, only to resume in urgent whispers once she was out of hearing range. Students who had never paid attention to her before now watched her with expressions ranging from awed of fear to morbid curiosity. The first real test came at her locker, where Amy was waiting with an expression of mingled relief and terror. "Sarah," Amy said urgently, "we need to talk. Now." "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, though she had a feeling she already knew. "Madison spent all day yesterday making phone calls," Amy said, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "She's been talking to her parents, to school administrators, to people I don't even know. She's planning something big." Sarah nodded, having expected as much. Madison's type didn't handle public humiliation well, especially when it came from someone they had underestimated. "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly, but I heard Jessica talking to someone on the phone last night. Something about military records and background checks and whether minors can actually serve in combat roles." Amy's voice was getting higher with anxiety. "Sarah, if what you said on Saturday is true, Madison is going to try to use it against you somehow." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. If Madison was investigating her military service, she might uncover information that could cause problems far beyond high school social drama. Sarah's records were supposed to be sealed while she was a minor, but there were ways to access information if someone had the right connections and enough determination. "Amy," Sarah said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens over the next few days, I need you to stay away from me. Don't sit with me at lunch, don't walk with me between classes, don't get involved in whatever Madison is planning." Amy's face flushed with hurt and anger. "You're ditching me? Just like that?" "I'm protecting you," Sarah said firmly. "Madison is about to declare war, and I don't want you to become collateral damage. What if I don't want to be protected? What if I want to help?" Sarah looked at Amy's determined expression and felt a stab of genuine affection for the girl who had been her first real friend at Lincoln High. But she also knew that Amy had no idea what kind of storm was coming. "This isn't your fight," Sarah said gently. "And, trust me, you don't want to be anywhere near me when Madison makes her move." The first period bell rang, cutting off Amy's protest and forcing them to head to their respective classes. As Sarah walked toward advanced mathematics, she noticed that students seemed to be giving her more space than usual, as if she were surrounded by an invisible force field of danger. Mr. Chen's classroom felt like a sanctuary, a place where equations and logic reigned supreme and high school politics seemed irrelevant. But, even here, Sarah could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. The story of Saturday night had obviously grown in the telling, and she suspected that by now, half the school believed she was some kind of superhuman warrior. "Miss Martinez," Mr. Chen said as class began, "could you solve this problem for us?" He had written a complex calculus equation on the board, the kind that would normally require several minutes of careful work. Sarah approached the whiteboard and began working through the solution with the methodical precision that had always calmed her mind in stressful situations. As she wrote, she became aware that the classroom had fallen completely silent. Even the usual background noise of rustling papers and whispered conversations had stopped. When she finished and turned around, she found 30 pairs of eyes staring at her with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "Excellent work," Mr. Chen said, though he looked slightly puzzled by the classroom's strange atmosphere. "That's a problem most college students would struggle with." Sarah returned to her seat, trying to ignore the continued stares and whispers. Whatever Madison was planning, the anticipation was already affecting the entire school's social dynamic. The morning continued with similar scenes in each of her classes. Teachers seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, but students watched Sarah with the fascination of people observing a caged predator. Some seemed awed by the idea that they were in the presence of a real combat veteran. Others appeared skeptical, as if they suspected the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. It was during the break between second and third period that Madison finally made her first move. Sarah was walking down the main hallway when she noticed a crowd gathering near the principal's office. Students were clustering around something posted on the bulletin board, their voices rising in excitement and concern. As Sarah approached, she could see people holding their phones up to take pictures of whatever they were looking at. The crowd parted as she got closer, and Sarah saw exactly what Madison had done. Posted on the bulletin board, in a position where every student in the school would see it during passing periods, was a large printout of what appeared to be an official military document. The header read United States Department of Defense Personnel Action Request, and Sarah's name was clearly visible in several places throughout the text. But it wasn't a real document, or rather, it was a real form that had been cleverly altered to tell a very different story than the truth. According to the posted document, Sarah Martinez had been dishonorably discharged from the Navy for psychological instability and aggressive behavior toward fellow service members. The forgery was sophisticated, probably created by someone with access to professional graphic design software and a detailed knowledge of military paperwork. But Sarah could see the subtle signs that it wasn't authentic: slightly wrong fonts, inconsistent formatting, and terminology that didn't match actual DoD documents. Unfortunately, none of the students staring at the document would know enough about military paperwork to spot these flaws. To them, this looked like official proof that Sarah was not only lying about her service record, but was actually a dangerous individual who had been kicked out of the military for violent behavior. "Is this real?" someone behind Sarah asked in a whisper. "It looks official," another voice replied. "Jesus, no wonder she's been moving around so much. She's probably been kicked out of every school she's attended." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her training taking over, the heightened awareness, the automatic assessment of threats and escape routes, the cold calculation of response options. Someone had just publicly branded her as both a liar and a dangerous individual, using forged documents that could potentially affect her future prospects. This wasn't just high school bullying anymore. This was character assassination using falsified government documents, which crossed the line into serious legal territory. "Excuse me," Sarah said calmly, stepping forward to examine the document more closely. The crowd around her shifted nervously, some students actually backing away as if they expected her to explode into violence. Sarah ignored them and focused on the details of the forgery, memorizing the specific alterations and noting the quality of the work. "Miss Martinez," a new voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Principal Edwards approaching with a concerned expression. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s who had always struck Sarah as well-meaning but overwhelmed by the complexities of managing a large high school. "Principal Edwards," Sarah said politely. I see someone has posted some interesting documents about me. Yes, well, Principal Edwards said uncomfortably, I was hoping we could discuss this in my office. Privately. Sarah nodded and followed him through the crowd of students who watched their progress with the intensity of spectators at a gladiator match. As they walked, she noticed Madison standing near her locker with a satisfied expression on her face, surrounded by her usual coterie of followers. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Sarah saw the triumphant gleam in Madison's gaze. The girl clearly believed she had found the perfect weapon to destroy her enemy, not just rumors or social manipulation, but what appeared to be official documentation of Sarah's alleged failures and instability. Principal Edwards' office was a cluttered space filled with the detritus of decades in education, plaques, certificates, photographs, and stacks of paperwork that seemed to grow taller every day. He gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from his desk while he settled into his chair with the weary resignation of someone who